Ukraine will never win, or they can win provided they don't join NATO. That's my question. Would you agree? They rejected that. Zelensky, the piano-playing, penis-piano-playing president.
Awesome guy. Love that video.
Yeah, he plays piano with his circumcised penis.
Don't know why. Do you think the circumcision affects the tone of the music, or
how can you follow me?
You okay? How can I? Okay, so is my question about NATO expansion? Is my question about Zelensky's penis and following him because of that?
Yeah, it's circumcised, mind you. It's much shorter, and he's still playing. He manages to play piano.
It just shows how large his is, I guess. I don't know.
Welcome back to Crucible, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we've got Dylan Burns from Dylan Burns TV going up against a newcomer to the Crucible, Tomovis Dominus. This is going to be an interesting topic on the Ukraine, as I think Tomovis has an interesting premise. We're going to kind of dive right in with the 7-minute opening statements. But before we do, Dylan, briefly tell everybody where they can find you, and just briefly a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my camera is going to be malfunctioning all day today, just like last time. I just can't get it fixed. But my name is Dylan Burns. I cover foreign policy stuff quite a lot. I care a lot about issues overseas and, you know, the interconnectedness of the world, and talking about it on my channel. I just got back from Ukraine. I'm going to be going back to Ukraine very shortly to interview civilians about how the war has affected them, IED crews, aid workers, stuff like that. You can find my most of my journalistic stuff on Dylan Burns TV, and my daily content live stream stuff on DylanBurnsLIVE on my second channel. You can follow me on Twitter, DylanBurns7076.
All right, appreciate that very much. Tomovis, go ahead, shout yourself out. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Please be brief.
Hello, everyone. It's your boy Tommy, or Tomovis Dominus as I go. I'm a comedic YouTube animator. I cover lots of different political, economic, and theological things. You can find my YouTube and BitChute channel. It's the same as my name in this debate. And you can also find me on Facebook and Twitter, where we do some occasional posting. But yeah, other than that, I'd like to read and discuss lots of ancient and modern history. And yeah, always happy to come on and debate, discuss, and all that.
All right, we appreciate that very much. As you were the challenger, Tomovis, we're going to go ahead and let you open first. Before you do, just understand I'm going to be making fun of your accent pretty much all night because I think it's fun to do. But I'm going to give you the floor now. You've got 7 minutes for your opening statement.
Before we get into that, I want to remind everybody in the chat, we are going to be taking callers tonight. So mods, please pin that Discord link in the chat periodically. If you want to call into the stream, get in the Discord, get vetted by the mods, who will actually be me. Tag me, and I will send you a stream link to come on and actually ask a question directly. So just wanted to put that out there. We are taking callers tonight. So, yeah.
All right. Go ahead, Tom, whenever you're ready with your opening statement.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Also, thank you for Dylan coming on as well. Always good to debate. Now, with my opening statement, I view the conflict in eastern Ukraine as an unfortunate consequence to necessary yet disastrous decisions that have taken place for many years. Specifically, I'm going to be putting the starting point at 1991, at the fall of the Soviet Union. The issues between both Russia and Ukraine have always remained very contested due to this very complex relationship that's existed in the past, continues to exist in the present, and will most likely continue in the future. From its founding, many European nation-states have always had far-right and far-left political movements that have grown within not just Ukraine, but also all across the continent. How each nation has dealt with them or responded to them has mostly been by their own decisions or attitudes towards these said movements. However, particularly in Ukraine, what I'd like to point is that unfortunately large portions of Nazism or fascism, however you wish to call it, has existed since the Second World War and has been a part not just of a large political game, but a major part of its culture and government. It has affected the rights of particular individuals, specifically those in the Orthodox Church, but also other minority groups, whether it be the LGBTQ, women, Russians and such. And ultimately, what I would say my main position is that unfortunately, due to the Nazi presence, both within the political parties and government, but also within specific military units of Ukraine, has led to an unfortunate but justified Russian invasion response or military operation, whichever one people wish to call it, which is occurring right now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's my opening statement. Did you guys get that?
Yeah, I don't know. Something
happened. Yeah, something happened.
I don't know if it was just me. I thought it was just me.
No, yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly what went down, but for a second the stream blipped, or I don't know.
I didn't hear anything for the last about 30 seconds. 30
seconds. So if you want to close off with the last 30 seconds.
All good. Yeah. So what I would ultimately say, my main position is that unfortunately, due to a large Nazi presence or fascist presence within Ukraine, both within its political parties and governmental structure, but also within particular military units of Ukraine, has led to an unfortunate but justified Russian invasion response or military operation, which is occurring now, however which you wish to put it. And yeah, that was basically the end of my statement.
All right, go ahead, Dylan. 7 minutes on the clock whenever you're ready.
Sir, I'm not going to need the 7 minutes. So I've talked about justifications for the war a lot. I've never actually had a situation where I had to go back and forth specifically on if the denazification aspect of the war is a valid justification for the invasion. And the main reason why is I don't know really any Westerners who believe this. Most of the people that I have engaged in that do believe this narrative are Russian speakers living in Russia. It's mostly something cooked up for a domestic audience, and so I don't think it has communicated that well effectively internationally. I think the most effective way it has been communicated is trying to undercut support for Ukraine by pointing to this to say, well, maybe we shouldn't give them guns because of these people in the military who are fascists, or these people in society who are fascists. So it's interesting to have this discussion because I haven't been able to find a Westerner who holds this position and says that this is an actual justification for the war, and not the multipolarity, not NATO, but the denazification aspect. So I'll try to keep it relatively brief. I think that the Russian government has highly exaggerated how prevalent Nazism is in Ukrainian society, how much it dominates Ukrainian political life, and how it has affected the Ukrainian government in the way they behave towards, say, Russian-speaking populations, to the extent that they say. For example, the idea that ethnic cleansing is occurring, the idea that genocide is occurring, or any of these aspects. I would also say that for all of the Nazis that are in the Ukrainian military, which I would say is a very small percentage, but they do exist, there are also Nazis in the Russian military. Primarily, I would point to Rusich being an example of an organization that is working with the Russian government in Ukraine, and not only in areas like in occupied Kherson, where they were part of the occupation, but were also involved in combat operations throughout the country. And so if the Russian government cares so much about denazification, can you use Nazis to denazify Nazis? Can Nazis make somebody less anti-Semitic? Can Nazis make the people of Ukraine less hate gay people less? Could these Rusich soldiers help save the Jews of Ukraine from the tyrannical Nazi government of the Russian-speaking Jew Volodymyr Zelensky? I think that there is a problem with, definitely when it comes to like Bandera, like worship, and bigotry towards gay people and bigotry towards Romani people within Ukrainian society, but the Russian invasion has done absolutely nothing to address any of these issues, and the soldiers that are being sent to solve these issues, and many times feel the same way about these ethnic minorities. Definitely Romani people, most certainly the LGBTQ plus community. The Russian military does not give a fuck, especially Chechen soldiers, many of which who have been involved in the rounding up of homosexuals in Chechnya and abusing homosexuals in Chechnya. As Kadyrov has said, they don't exist there. So I do not think the Russian army is engaged in a liberation operation for gays, Romani people, Jews, and minorities within Ukraine. I don't think that's the case. I think it's mostly a propaganda tool because most Slavs, for good reason, hate Nazism. That's basically it. That's all I need to say.
All right, gentlemen, We expect that this debate will run somewhere around an hour and 20 minutes. We're going to have a bunch of callers. I can already see it. And then, of course, super chats. Expect to spend some time here tonight. I'm going to open the floor with that. You guys can go ahead and go at it.
All good. So did you want to start off, Dylan, with anything, or did you want me to? It's up to you. Really.
I mean, I can start. So I guess my question to you would be, do you think that if the Russians won the war, that the groups you talked about, homosexuals, or I would say, I guess Jews would be another group that traditionally Nazis target, or Romani people would have a higher standard of living than they currently do within Ukraine? Because what I've seen from Russian propaganda, definitely when it comes to the Chechens and other divisions, is that they're saying they're fighting a war against homosexuality, against transgenderism, against gender confusion, against these degenerates, which the right sector actually agrees with them on. Not that they're fighting that war against them, but they agree with them on the views towards homosexuality and towards these groups. You said that they're trying to fight, they're trying to fight against this Nazism. Like I don't see that ideological commitment towards the liberation of queer folk.
All good. Well, I'll probably clear it up now that for the most part, from what I've seen or studied, that the reason why, one of the main reasons the Russian government has used the reason or excuse of going into Ukraine to combat Nazism is not so much against like traditional people, say queer folk or Jews. I'm not sure if I cleared that up, but I'll say that for the most part, it's mostly been to help liberate what they consider their own people, which I mean ethnically Russians. Whether or not many of these people, because obviously political and ethnic landscapes are very complex in Ukraine, it's not so much black and white. But for the most part, I wouldn't say that, no. The standard of living probably would not go up for the average person if they do identify as gay, if they are technically Jewish. If anything, they would feel the exact same way. However, as I said, what I wanted to distinctify is that I'm not claiming that the Russians are going in to fight Nazism for the LGBTQ people or Jews or anything like that. I highly doubt they ever will. But from what I gather, the reason why, one of the main justified reasons going into Ukraine is to combat Nazism against its own people, specifically within like the Donetsk region and Crimea, where ethnic Russians are at its highest in what was considered Ukraine.
Okay, so I guess it's just in your intro you talked about like discrimination, like for example, right sector has treated gay people very negatively. Right sector has a very violent history when it comes to, for example, interacting with gay authors and stuff like that. But the Ukrainians, when you ask them why they're fighting this war, or you have like the propaganda state line, I never hear the line, we're fighting against the queer hordes of Russia coming to make our kids gay. I do hear that on Russian state TV. I do hear that from Russian commanders, Chechen commanders. I do hear that from even sometimes just run-of-the-mill Russian soldiers, because this is something that's talked about, that this degeneracy, they're going to bring Russia to its knees, and then they're going to make it gay. And so when you brought that up at the start, if anything, I would say that queer people would probably have a lower standard of living. And from the gay people that I've personally talked to, they don't like the idea of Russian occupation because it's been such an ideological sticking point for Russian state TV and for a lot of like smaller level commanders.
Yeah. Definitely, I'd agree with you on that. That anyone who probably identifies as the LGBTQ or such, I would not be surprised if they wouldn't want Russian occupation. But yeah, sorry that I didn't clarify. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. But yeah, for the most part, as I said, and I'll clarify. The main reason I believe that one of the reasons they're using Nazism to combat Nazism is not specific Nazis targeting, say, Jews or the LGBTQ. I did mention, where was it in my opening statement? Yes, that within Ukraine itself, not so much Russia itself, that many minority groups like the LGBTQ and such, or the Orthodox Church have experienced discrimination and such. But I wasn't trying to clarify that that was why Russia was specifically going in for those people.
Okay. I guess I didn't know why that. I just didn't know why you originally brought it up. But we can move on from that. Here's a question, and this is a very basic question. Do you think that the Ukrainian government is a Nazi government? Because that's what the Russian government seems to assert when they are making their claims about denazification, that the government in Kiev is a fascist, Banderite, Nazi government. Do you believe that to be the case?
I believe the Ukrainian government has engaged in what you could consider as Nazi behavior. Obviously, I'm very certain I don't believe the current political party, I don't actually know what it's called in Ukraine or Russia. I don't believe it has any names to far-right supremacists or far-right groups. However, specific things that I would say that you could compare to Nazism is attacks on the Orthodox Church, the banning of freedom of expression and speech, such as with certain newspaper and media outlets online that say disagree with the war or don't say positive things, but also a large portion of political people within Ukraine that used to be a part of the Azov Battalion, now regiment, actually did form one of the main political parties that I don't believe it's a major party. But
you're talking about the National Corps. Which was brought about by its former founder, which was a neo-Nazi. The person who founded the Azov Battalion was a neo-Nazi. Undeniable.
Yeah.
You say it's a main political party. It has 0 seats in the Rada. It's not a main political party if it has 0 out of 450 seats. This would be saying like the Libertarian Party is a major political party in the United States. It doesn't have a single seat in Congress. It doesn't have a single seat in the Rada. I wouldn't call it a major political party. Why would you say it's major?
I don't believe I did. I said it wasn't a major political party.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So, but if it's politically failing, wouldn't that be an indication that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people are largely like not Nazi if they have the opportunity to vote for the Nazi party and they get less than 1% of the vote every time?
Well, for that specific party, yes. But what we have to look at as well is the political party that's currently in power with certain behaviors that you could tie to Nazism.
Zelensky's party then?
Yeah, Zelensky's party, yes.
Okay, so the one thing you brought up, it was suppression of freedom of expression. I have certain problems with media, how media is managed in Ukraine. I think my biggest problem is the recent media bill that was passed. I think that's a major failure on part of the Ukrainian government. But I would also say that, let's say, even though I think that free press in Ukraine is more free, from my personal experience, from me interacting with it, from me criticizing Zelensky from within Ukraine, obviously you don't need to take that at face value. But let me just say, let's just assume that the Ukrainian government just straight up, if you disagree with them, they suppress you. I'm asserting that's not the case, but let's say I assume that. You could say that easily of the Russian government. That if you were to say, don't invade, this is an evil war, our soldiers are bastards, they shouldn't be doing this, you will get arrested in Russia. You can get like 10 to 15 years. A lot of people have gotten prison time for criticizing the war. A lot of people have gotten prison time for protesting against the war. Some people protested against the war, and what they would do is they would take them to the police station and then give them the draft cards. So if that is proof of Nazism that justifies an invasion of Ukraine, should the United States invade Russia to liberate it from its Nazi press regulations?
I would say that probably not. No.
Okay, so I don't know why suppression of the press is necessarily Nazism. There's a lot of authoritarian ways the press can be treated that isn't Nazi in nature. For example, in Turkey, there's a lot of suppression of Kurdish press, Kurdish politicians, stuff like that. That's very bad, but that's not Nazi. That's not proof it's a Nazi government. That's just proof that it has problems with the press. It has a problem with press freedom. And again, I would assert that in Ukraine, press is much more free than in Russia. But even if I was to grant you that it was very oppressive, very bad, that doesn't mean they're Nazi. And Russia would be extremely hypocritical if they're going to use that as a justification, considering they engage in the same behavior.
Yeah. One of the reasons I tie with such as destruction of freedom of oppression, freedom of expression, not oppression, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and such that is, as I said earlier, many far left and far right political groups, whether it be historically in the past or present now, that is behavior that is linked to those groups, which is why I brought it up. But obviously, yeah.
But it would also equally apply to Russia, correct?
Yes.
If not more so, which would be my assertion.
To a degree, yes.
Okay, so would that be a good justification for, say, the United States invading Russia and fleeing Vladivostok from press suppression?
I would say if the United States wanted to go to war, and that was what they would consider, that would probably be something they may consider as a justified response. Personally, I probably wouldn't agree with it, but
me either. By the way, just to be clear, I wouldn't agree with invading Russia.
Yeah. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. That probably would be something they would use and would argue.
Well, you're using that currently to justify the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
But Russia engages in the same behavior, if not worse. Shouldn't Russia get its own house in order before trying to fix Ukrainian press censorship laws?
Well, see.
By the way, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but if Russia was to take over Ukraine, do you think that the press would get any freer?
In terms from a blank point of view, no, probably not. It would probably remain the same.
Okay, so I don't understand the logic. If you could explain it to me.
All good, yeah. So for the most part, we'll say back last year, about 300 to 500 people were arrested in Russia for social media posts. Whatever those posts were, probably most probable linked towards that of what was happening in Ukraine. Many people obviously have also been, harassed, they've been arrested and such with what's happening in Russia. What I take issue is that if you were to go to most Western countries, whether it be not just Ukraine, but also to other parts of Western Europe, in the UK and France, a lot of the time, statistically, it's much higher. I believe it was close to 3,000 to 5,000 people that were arrested for online social media posts. So while
in Ukraine?
Yes, it may. Yes.
Okay. I would say this would be my defense of the government here. Even if I don't agree with all of it, by the way, I don't agree because I always talk about Ukraine as kind of like it's a work in progress when it comes to its democracy, its institutions, and it's been improving those institutions for I think over the last 8 years. But when it comes, for example, police, how police interact with the public, when it comes to just general corruption, like these are all issues that Ukraine is working on, and press freedom is one of those issues. Even if I do think it's at a better state, I would say that Ukraine is a nation invaded. They have other soldiers on its territory capturing its land. And the way it's going to treat press and information is going to be fundamentally different than a country that is not, in its view, having its nationhood put into question and having its existence put in under existential threat. And for example, if you look at press censorship during the Civil War, it's going to spike under Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because Abraham Lincoln, even though he's seen as a hero in the United States, he engaged in sometimes even behavior that was unconstitutional when it comes to the suspension of habeas corpus and other stuff, because he saw it as an existential struggle for the future of the nation. And so I don't know if I would really be willing to compare any nation state that is being invaded by another nation that is denying even its right to exist to a nation state that has its borders completely respected and is doing the invading. But again, like we're all kind of like saying like, oh, is Ukrainian press censorship worse here, or is Russian press censorship worse here? Yeah. Neither you or me are under the delusion that Russia is invading to bring the freedom of the press to Ukraine, right? And that wouldn't happen under an invasion either.
No, that's very obvious.
Yeah, so I don't understand how that would be a justification for a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Well, for the most part, like no government will ever be perfect. I don't believe, obviously I don't agree with what's happening with the Ukrainian freedom of expression and speech. But as you said, most governments, or Ukraine for the most part is working to better improve itself. And obviously I don't idiotically believe that, certain governments are extremely good and extremely bad. They must be perfect. It's obviously very, very, very complex. And obviously, no nation is ever going to be perfect. No system is going to be perfect. What I would say is that because of what not just the Ukrainian parliament, but also many Ukrainian politicians have done with their views and such towards freedom of expression, freedom of speech, how they've treated Russian minorities and such, has led to Putin justifying himself, saying, well, because my people and all that are being treated in such way, that is why he's justifying himself for an invasion. Whether or not it's actually good that he's doing it, I would say is definitely key, but that's not so much what I'm arguing, whether or not, whether or not it's a good or bad justification.
Do you support it though? I was under the impression that this justifies the invasion, as in you think, oh, the invasion is morally correct because of the Nazism. That's what I was led to believe. Do you not support the invasion?
I do support the invasion, but what I would say in terms of like whether or not we'll take obviously the example of Russia invading Ukraine. Whether or not you believe, I think it's good that they're going in to stop Nazism, or whether or not it's bad that they're trying to stop Nazism. That is a good moral discussion to have, a good understanding. But also, what I would say primarily, I'm not trying to base my opinions on feelings or, how this makes me feel. I'm trying to base myself on facts and information as best I can. And what I would say is, while whether or not people view it as a good or bad justification, that is one of the things Russia has gone into Ukraine for. So that's something I've primarily taken focused in.
Well, I would argue that it's not really a major motivator. Like, I think it's more of a propaganda point overall. If they really cared about Nazism in Ukraine, why are they working with organizations like Crucible, which is an explicitly neo-Nazi organization? They're giving neo-Nazis bullets, guns, artillery shells, tanks, artillery guns, all types of air support, drones, and they're sending them into like areas like they did in Kherson. And a lot of these soldiers are like openly expressing their views online. Like Crucible Telegram is extremely popular. People go to it often to listen to like the Russian military kind of perspective. They released blog posts talking about the occupation of Kherson, where they talked about these disgusting coal holes and how they won't let go of their language, and they'll go like really disgusting type of dialogue. Why? How can you say you're fighting this conquest against Nazism using Nazis? It's like fighting ISIS with ISIS fighters.
I would say it comes down to practicality over ideology. Obviously, it like that is in itself hypocritical. I don't deny that Russians have not committed war crimes, or that they're not working with people who are not the best. You only have to look into the Wagner Group, the private military company, if you want to look at Russian war crimes.
Founded by a neo-Nazi, by the way. His chest covered in swastikas, SS symbols. One of the most popular military groups within all of Ukraine, probably like 40,000 soldiers. Founded by a neo-Nazi. Just like Azov. And it just feels very like, this doesn't seem to be the issue. Maybe it's more resources or military bases. Maybe ideology like Russian nationalism. But like this feels like George Wallace coming to me and saying, Dylan, that was very racist. I don't know if I trust you to really care about that.
Well, yeah, what I would say is that, it ultimately comes down to practicality over ideology. And this is what many people have done. Whether you want to look at, say, the Americans supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan to fight ISIS, or whether or not you want to, we look at the Russians supporting their own neo-Nazis to fight what people consider neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it just comes down to the fact that they've justified themselves. They have given themselves the justification that, well, we want to go in, we want to invade Ukraine because we believe they are neo-Nazis. But obviously, there's definitely going to be a bit of hypocrisy in the fact that they want to use specific soldiers that probably have battle-hardened experience, that probably go in not to be nice with sunshine and rainbows, but to go in and invade a country. And unfortunately, yeah, Russia does suffer from a lot of hypocrisy, in my view.
When you say, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, it's all right. Go on.
When you say that this is about ideology, right? This is just, you know, they're using the tools at their disposal. It kind of sounds like it. Like Rusich is there, so they use them. I could easily make the same argument about Ukraine, that the reason why the Ukrainian government incorporated Azov in 2014, which started as football hooligans, by the way, in Mariupol. They were originally just like football hooligans. The reason why they got the balaclavas and they became, you know, the little green men, they became the little black men because of their balaclava outfits, was because the Ukrainian military could not stand up against Russia, which at the time, and people still think to some degree now, that they were the most powerful, or at least the second powerful military in the world. Like they're a strong nation, and Ukraine does not have the ability to fight them off, so we're going to give everyone we can guns to fight off against this. Why is it that is an ideological commitment to Nazism? When they do that and they give guns to Azov and say, please defend us, as Azov has gotten more and more milquetoast as time's gone on. Not that there's not still Nazism in it, but it has gotten more milquetoast as they try to distance themselves from the wolf's angle. And like a few days ago during Hanukkah, there was a video release of them dancing with Jews and shit. Like they're literally doing the almost like tokenist way of like, look at us, we're so cool. Why is it that for them, that's a commitment to Nazism? That shows, you know, we need to fight them, a crusade against them for Nazism. But when Russia does it, that's not ideological. Even though if you talk to those soldiers, they're saying, yeah, we're fighting against the Jewish banks. Hey, Zelensky's a Jew. We need to fight against him. Hey, they're bringing the Western degeneracy. The shaitan of the West is poisoning us. That feels ideological. That sounds ideological. Or I should say TV is making the ideological argument against Western degeneracy.
I would say for the concern is that the Russian Wagner group, as we brought up, it's not actually part of the Russian military as a basic unit, but it's considered a private company that is purchased and loaned to the Russian military. The Azov Regiment, formerly battalion, is considered part of the Ukrainian National Guard, which by its base definition, a National Guard is a primary military force. The key word being primary. So what I would say is that, unfortunately, that while, yes, obviously Russia is engaging in hypocrisy by hiring Nazis, it's a base company that they're working with. It's not actually integrated part of their country as a proper military unit that they rely on, unlike Ukraine, which have literally made it part of their National Guard, as I said.
I think you couldn't. This is the worst time possible to make this argument. Wagner has more influence than ever in the Russian military, where Wagner is basically just straight up standing off against the Ministry of Defense on many different occasions, like saying we can perform these tasks better than the military. They're trying to embarrass Shoigu through saying, look, we can capture Bakhmut, we can capture Soledar, we are the backbone now. Allow us to recruit these prisoners, rapists, murderers, all these types of like the real scum of the earth. Allow us to bring them into this organization founded by a neo-Nazi and fight against the West. I would say the Wagner Group has more influence in the Russian military overall when it comes to the tasks they're getting done and how much the Russian government relies on them than Azov does. They're larger. They're much larger, if I recall.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, they are much larger. But as I said, while the Russians are working with Wagner, at the end of the day, they are still a private company. Well, publicly, I should say. Privately, I'm not aware of what is.
What is the difference there that makes this substantial? Like, oh, now that they're private mercenaries, now the Nazism is no longer a concern. Like, what's the, like, how does that make it like different? Considering that Russia has used, they're going to continue to use Wagner past this conflict. They're going to use them as an extension of the Russian state, like they have in Central Africa and Libya and Syria. So they're basically just Russian soldiers, just the structure is different. Like why is that officialness so different? I mean, they're serving the capacity that any other soldier would.
I would say the officialness is key, is because, and as I said, the National Guard of a country is defined as the primary military force. Now, while in Russia, obviously, the status of the Wagner Group, it is very substantial, as we said, and obviously they have been recruiting from prisons. I have seen that. Their status is still currently as a private military company. they're not taking their head orders from, they are based under the Russian oligarch. They're not actually taking their main orders from Putin, but obviously,
do you like? I mean, this feels kind of like, oh, we've gone one piece removed, therefore you don't worry about it anymore. Like, this is the type of thing that like a lot of organizations do, where they're like, we don't want to do the dirty work ourselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this other organization, which will not sully our image, do the dirty work for us. At a certain point, definitely as the Wagner Group has grown to what, like 40,000, like they've really grown recently. Like at a certain point, it's almost, they're just using it as a way to deny. Like if Wagner was to disappear right now, that would be a massive disaster for the Russian military. They are reliant on this organization. They have a lot of leverage, If anything, they have more leverage than Azov does, really. And let's say, moving past that, okay, what about Rusich then? They're not mercenaries. They work under the LPR, the People's Militia, right? So what's the excuse for that? They're not a private mercenary group. They're working for the quote-unquote republic that Russia's coming to liberate these Nazis from the Nazis.
What I would say for the most part is that obviously the LPR and DPR, when the invasion first began, obviously Russia didn't justify going into, well, not officially justify going in to conquer their lands. But as I said earlier, obviously a lot of what Russia is doing probably does come down, even though verbally they say one thing, it comes down to practicality over ideology. As I said, it doesn't surprise me.
But that was the excuse you used for the mercenaries. But then I could just say this, but again, I could use that same logic for Azov. Like, why can't I just say the reason why the libcuck Zelensky, who's a neoliberal centrist shill, if you want to know his actual, like, what his politics really is, who, by the way, his government and Petro Poroshenko government has instituted discrimination protections for trans people, gay people. I don't think these are Nazis, right? The reason they're working with Azov here is because Azov has shown itself to be quite effective in fighting, and they're useful. And now they're like a PR victory in Ukraine. Azov is better than gold. I mean, Azov stuff is like everywhere because of their defense. But I don't see how the argument couldn't just be, okay, the reason we work with Azov in right sector is out of practicality, to stop them from taking cities and burning down villages and stopping them from getting deeper into the country. I can make the same argument.
Yes, but Azov aren't a mercenary group. That actually.
But then we're back to Rusich. We're back to Rusich and circled back around, right? Because Rusich isn't a mercenary group. Neo-Nazis fighting under the banner of the government. I think they might have transitioned. I forget exactly what the status is now that the LPR no longer technically is like a country, but they've been fighting under the LPR. This isn't even like a new thing. They've been fighting for them since like 2015. They've been fighting for like the last 8 years. So this isn't even like a new development, like, oh, the Russian neo-Nazis have just arrived on the block. They have been fighting and training people. Sometimes, and this was the complaint with Azov, sometimes Westerners who would then go back to the West and engage in some pretty gross behavior. They've had the same problem. And so if the problem is Nazism, I don't understand why they're working with these people. It just, you can say practicality, but I can make the same argument.
Yeah, as I said, obviously we have been going in circles in a bit, but I would say ultimately it probably does come down just to practicality of numbers. And obviously Russia feels that it can justify itself by attacking what they consider neo-Nazis in Ukraine, but sadly and ironically enough, using Nazis of their own to do the same behavior.
Yeah, and like we're just talking about who officially actually call themselves neo-Nazis, because if you go to Azov, the majority of their fighters are not neo-Nazis. There are neo-Nazis in it, but the majority of them are not neo-Nazis. Even during some of the earlier stages, I wouldn't even say the majority of them neo-Nazis. You maybe say they're far right or maybe nationalists, but I do think there's a distinction there between a nationalist and a Nazi. I know that might be crazy to say as a left-winger, but
no, that's a very valid point. I think that's definitely a valid point, that there is a difference between what we would consider nationalists and a Nazi. In fact, I believe it was estimated between 20 to 50% of most members are actually hardcore Nazis. But the main argument—
where did you get that estimation?
Those estimations come from the actual Ukrainian government themselves.
When do they
when the
publish
United
those
Na-
numbers? That's really interesting because the founder of
Yeah.
it said it was 20% probably. That was his original prediction shortly after it was founded. And the idea has been since then it's gone lower than that. And so if it's actually reverse, then that's different. But then 20 to 50, that's a fucking wild ass range too.
Yeah, 20 to 50% is obviously varying. But yeah, it's something the United Nations have looked into several times. And yeah, obviously, as you said, one of the founders did say 20%. What the actual numbers are, we'll probably never know because obviously statistics are just best guess. Well, not best guess, but their best rough estimations.
Very rough
But yeah,
estimation. 30% range is pretty rough.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say ultimately what Russia probably classifies as a Nazi, whether or not they're actually a Nazi or right wing, would probably be, well, obviously it's a very difficult thing that people argue now because essentially if you are right wing, you're just Nazi.
You're not, definitely when it comes to like Ukraine, but also the Russian government has argued that like fundamentally the Ukrainian government is a Nazi government. And so once you're getting into that level, it's like everyone's a Nazi. If you support the Ukrainian government, you are a Nazi, right? I mean, I regularly get called a Nazi for supporting Ukraine. I'm like a libtard, right? I am the most libtardy libcuck you could possibly imagine out of your head. Globos, homos, like #1, right? You can call that a lot of things. You can call that wrong and you disagree with it, but it's not Nazism, right? And it feels like it's just become like a blanket term to just like almost like dehumanize the opposition, which I think right-wingers definitely would like sympathize with that.
I wouldn't call you a Nazi or accuse you of Nazism. I'll make that clear now. I would say that's a pretty, retarded base opinion to say that, oh, you disagree with me. Well, Nazi, that's
what's your definition of Nazi then?
My definition of a Nazi?
Yeah.
I would consider someone a Nazi who engages in very specific political, military, and social activities, such as when we look at, for an example, like the original Nazis, right? They wore specific.
Hugo Boss.
No, not the Hugo Boss. I'm thinking of imagery. That's it. They wore specific imagery tied in with specific beliefs. They did certain things such as target certain groups of people. They believed in things
okay,
like
so to be blunt, saying they had certain beliefs, had certain imagery, they targeted certain groups of people. That is very vague, and I could probably use that label against basically any political ideology.
Yeah. For the most part, well, personally, I don't normally use the word Nazi. It's very rare. Rare. Not so much that I have any issue with you. And the main issue, I use it reluctantly, is because of my own background, because I am Eastern European.
Okay, Katie,
so
are you comfortable disclosing which country?
Czechoslovakian specifically.
Okay, got you.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say that I don't actually know the base term Nazi. I will admit that. I'm not going to sit here and be, very prideful and say, oh, I know everything. I don't know the base definition off the top of my head.
Okay, but it's kind of a little important if it's the justification to invade Ukraine, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say for the most part that what I consider a Nazi personally, not going off the base definition, would be someone that engages in extreme political behavior in terms of targeting like freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Was Stalin a Nazi?
No.
All of that could be applied to Stalin, no? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion.
Yes, but Stalin was a communist. He wasn't a Nazi.
Yes, but the definition you use for Nazi... Okay, so let's just make this easy. And like, Nazis are the guys who hate the Jews a lot, and they hate the gays a lot, and they're very far right, and they're very hardcore nationalistic. Very just to get past this, right?
Yeah.
So I want to add. So I want to move on to this idea of like the Russian people. I think we've covered a lot of this a lot. The idea that the Russian people, the persecution. I think this is something that probably you're gonna have more grounding in, but like more stuff to like put your heels in. So I want to understand how, for example, the language laws, which is probably the main thing the Russian government will always point to. This is like the main one. How that could be used to justify a military invasion, which has mostly killed the people who speak that language in the areas they're trying to liberate.
I would say that the discrimination that many of the Russian people have faced in Ukraine, but not obviously just Russian people. There's probably there is discrimination against lots of other groups, as I've said. For the most part, I would say that is one of many things that the Russians have used. I believe also just recently now they've started saying the targeting of the Orthodox Church, the targeting of specific Russian civilians in the Donetsk region.
Okay, so can we stick to the language law first? I think it'd be better to go from one to one. So
yeah.
I think when we talk about the language laws, so what the language laws said, there's a lot of blurriness around it, but here's the one that had the most anger about it. The language laws were a set of laws passed under the idea of like preserving the Ukrainian language. The idea is that the Ukrainian language historically has been pretty oppressed. Russian government has historically banned it during the Russian Tsardom. It was discouraged. It was not treated the best during the Soviet Union. There's this like cultural stigma about it. Like if you speak Ukrainian, you're a hick. You're from the backwater. You're not one of the industrious like intelligentsia members of like the big cities and areas like Kharkiv, for example. Kharkiv has been a center for like Russian language teaching for a while. Anyway, the idea was that if you go into a public building and you speak to a public official or a public worker in any way, they first have to speak in Russian with you. I mean, Ukrainian with you. And then if you speak Russian and you go past and you continue to speak Russian, or you ask for them to speak the Russian, they will speak the Russian. But the first language they have to use is Ukrainian. Now, personally, I don't agree with the law. I think it's a little silly. I think it would be better to do like funds and like actually going out and like helping language programs to promote the language and promote media and like help subsidize media that helps promote the language if you really care about that. But that is really not that horrifically bad. That is not something that I would say justifies a military invasion that is mostly going to kill the said people that we're trying to protect here, who this horrible thing that we need to bomb Ukraine for is that if they go into a public building, they have to first hear the public employee speak in Ukrainian, then they'll switch to Russian if you ask. If we passed that in the United States and then we said, hey, we have a lot of people in this country who don't speak English, we have a lot of problems with like integration in this country, so what we're going to do is we're going to pass a law that if you go to a public building, the person first speaks English, then they switch over to Spanish. Would that justify a Mexican invasion of the United States, considering that they used to control much of that territory? You can call it historical Mexico.
I would say that in itself, just focusing on the language would probably not, as a start, just be a base justification. I think if you're going to go invade on the basis that, someone speaks a different language, that is a bit ridiculous. I would say that the language laws are not just one specific. Obviously, they have talked about it a lot in Russia, but I would say it's a part of a lot of other discriminations that have been faced with the Russian people. It's just particularly that one has come up a lot because obviously, personally, as I said, I'm Eastern European. A large part of our culture, regardless of where we are, is actually the language that we speak. So it's definitely a hard thing personally and privately that most people probably would face. And I would say that that alone, probably wouldn't justify an invasion, but I would say that among many other discriminations that have occurred in Ukraine.
I see that, and maybe I'm being cruel here to some degree. Do tell me if I am. But
it's all right.
I honestly, under no circumstances, if I'm arguing to invade a country, right? Let's say I'm on the bully pulpit. I'm like, America, it's time to bomb some shit, for the 50 millionth time, some people need to be bombed, right? And I'm arguing on the bully pulpit. At no point during that, let's say I have an hour to make that argument, would I say, and did you know that if you go into a public building, the public employees will speak to you first in the native language of the country and will only switch languages if you ask by law. At no point would I be like, that's a justification to go bomb them. Like, I feel like if we're saying they raped, they pillaged, they passed laws to have them speak Ukrainian in public buildings before switching over the Russian at request. Like, I don't see how combined with anything, how that could be a contributor for invasion.
Well, as I said, and obviously, it probably wouldn't be wise to go and say that I'm going to go justify war based on how people speak. As I said, that in itself alone, no, I wouldn't say is a good justification by itself. But I would say that that among many other discriminations that the Russian people have faced is one of the main things that Russia has used to justify what they consider Nazism in Ukraine.
So here's the thing, though. You're going to talk about the banning of the Russian Orthodox Church in the big split that's happening right now. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is that would never have happened. Ever. It wouldn't have been possible to ever convince the Ukrainian government to do that unless the Russian government invaded Ukraine. Do you think otherwise, or do you disagree with that? Do you disagree with me, or do you agree with that? Like, do you think, like, I feel like a lot of the stuff that's happening now, definitely post-invasion, is almost like a nationalistic reactionary response. For example, a lot of the colonial, like the anti-colonial violence we saw as colonialism was collapsing, right? A lot of it was unjustified, unironically, like some killings of like white scientists or white like churchgoers or whatever. But that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the horrific stuff that was happening on the other side of that. Because that's just like when you push a society to the breaking point, that you're going to have those types of responses. And so a lot of the stuff that's happening now that people are really complaining about in Russia wouldn't have happened if Russia didn't invade the country.
I would say, unfortunately, in the case of the Orthodox Church, what would probably be a good way to explain it is that it's more or less been somewhat of a domino effect. Because what I've seen in terms of the discrimination against the Orthodox Church, a lot of it has been post-invasion. It's not been pre-invasion, which is why it's been obviously added on to what Russia justifies. I would say that, unfortunately, as a natural consequence to Russia's invasion, that unfortunately many of the Orthodox churches in Ukraine have been targeted, have been they have been discriminated against. Many churches have actually been confiscated for their land and their wealth. I've seen that both visually, and I've heard that verbally from many family members in Europe. And I think, unfortunately, it's a case of that Russia has gone into Ukraine, whether or not you believe it's right or wrong, using certain justifications. And obviously now, as a response, Ukraine has started targeting the Orthodox Church. But now, because Ukraine is doing all this, Russia's now going to add on to its justifications.
Okay.
And
so
obviously,
I just want to make sure we're not doing something where, like, let's say the Japanese afterwards said, well, we did Pearl Harbor because of Japanese internment camps. Like, no, that's not why you did Pearl Harbor. That was something that was descended from the fact that you attacked America, which they shouldn't have done, and was their fault, right? And so I understand the want to bring this up, but I also do not think it was a justification for the original invasion. A lot of the stuff that's going to be made and used, that's going to be the most convincing arguments now, is stuff that happened post-invasion, because all of the far-right nationalists that Russia like demonized so much, they basically said, like, look, we were right. You can't negotiate with them. They're barbaric. They're coming here. They're murdering us. They're raping our women. They're slaughtering our children. Look at Bucha. Look at Izium. Look at this. We were right the whole time. You should have believed us in right sector. That's what the reaction has been. They have emboldened the nationalist elements in the country, especially the far right. But the thing is, that's to be expected. That's if we were to invade any country, that you would expect the more nationalist and sometimes even far right elements to be the ones. Definitely, if it's like a historical opponent like Russia is, and there's a lot of ethnic hatred there, that's going to happen. So I kind of feel like Russia, in a way, has worsened the conditions for Russian-speaking people in Ukraine more than any other power in the world. Russia has killed more Russian speakers in the last 330 days than any other world power, any other power period. I would say when it comes to like citizens, like civilians. And for what? For what? For like what did they gain? What did they get out of this?
Truthfully, most Slavs know that victory cannot be achieved through sacrifice, and that is a legitimate belief. It's an unfortunate belief, and what I would say that unfortunately Russia, morally, most of their military understanding and thinking has been, throw people until we win. Whether you look at World War II, whether you look at any other war, unfortunately, it's a case of Russia will happily expend many people, not on the basis that it morally does or doesn't care, but on the basis that Russia have a lot of people. They have a very large population. They have a very large military, whether it's part of the government, privately funded as a company. I would say, unfortunately, one of the consequences to the war, because of discrimination against the church, which has led up to the invasion, unfortunately now, yes, you probably can argue that it has been made worse. But obviously Russia's not going to sit there and go, oh, well, we messed up, we're going to double back. They're now going to double down and make these arguments.
Well, then, but the smart thing to do would be to remove the suffering that these people are going under by bombing them, by striking them, by killing them. I mean, when I was in Kharkiv, everybody I interacted with who lost family members and were in the area fighting against the Russians, they're all Russian speakers. Same was true in Zaporozhye as well when I was interacting with them. And that's just not, that's just not even me just saying it. If you go and you hang out with the territorial defense of these areas where the civilians that are dying in the most numbers, Russian speakers have died on an extremely high percentage. And it's because the areas Russia are fighting over are predominantly Russian speaking. And so if the idea is they're coming to liberate these Russian speakers from Ukrainian speaking Ukrainian in the public building, and the suppression of free speech, what the Russians are going to do to them anyway, and now, like, I don't understand the justification for the initial invasion based off of this. Now, after the fact, we're talking about, well, now that the war's been going on for over 300 days, this new thing that's happened now is my post ad hoc justification. After it's already happened, we're now bringing it back to justify it. But also, let's talk about the Russian Orthodox Church. What did Kirill say? What happened about what should happen when it comes to mobilization, people going to Ukraine? He said publicly on camera as the head of a religious organization, hey, if you go to Ukraine and you die fighting the Ukrainians, you will go to heaven. If you are a country seeing the leader of a church say that about your country, and that country is invading you, it's not that surprising that the Ukrainian government was able to make the argument that, yes, maybe we should cut ties with this organization. Maybe we should make it so this organization cannot operate in this country. They didn't ban the idea of Orthodox Christianity or being Christian. People celebrated Orthodox Christmas on the 7th. People celebrated like the other more Westernoid Christmas on the 25th. They're targeting that religious institution, which he is a part of. And again, I'm not even necessarily justifying it, saying I agree with it, but I'm saying this is something that Russia contributed to more than anyone. It would have been much more difficult to make these arguments under different conditions when Russia was not invading Ukraine. All they've done is worsen the conditions for the people that they've said they're here to liberate. For what?
Unfortunately, it comes down to that they've found a justification and that what they believe they are liberating, unfortunately, it's a case of they're going to go in and they're going to go to war. They're not there to play nice, unfortunately. They're not, many Russian incidents have occurred, whether you look at hostage situations, that when they've gone to deal with something, they don't mess around with all this, hippy-dippy stuff of paperwork. They go in and they go to kill people. And unfortunately, and truthfully, unfortunately, the only equalizer in war is death. And unfortunately, I would say that while, yes, Russia has justified itself, they've tried to justify themselves by going into Ukraine. They probably have made things worse, which is an unfortunate consequence.
But the thing is, they've made things worse while also sacrificing so much. Because you talked about this earlier, how the Russians conduct themselves in war. This idea of sacrifice to the nation being very important culturally and when it comes to military strategy. So that means they're paying an incredibly high toll to get basically nothing. Very like you can measure recent Ukrainian gains by square miles and recent Russian gains by kind of like street names. And this is the condition they find themselves in, and it's for what? Because freedom of expression that they don't care about, the homosexuals, which they're going to also oppress as well. It certainly doesn't have anything to do with fucking anti-Semitism at all. They're not going to go in and protect the Romani community. In fact, there's more protections for LGBTQ plus people in Ukraine under its current government when it comes to anti-work discrimination protections that there are in Russia. So like, what's the like crusade against Nazism that's going to happen if they end up winning, which they can't even seem to do?
I would say for the most, well, I would say that well, firstly, I never claimed in terms of anti-Semitism. I haven't tried to argue that at all. I don't believe that's one of the things Russia is trying to do. As I said, my point of view is that they're basing their attacks of Nazism towards their own people, what they consider ethnically Russians that speak Russian. I would say, for the most part, what a logical side to look at is that this is probably the worst case scenario that Russia is now trying to deal with, which is not obviously what they logically went in to do. Logically, they went in to go and try and take a specific thing that now I would view is it's probably, gone a lot worse for them than what they initially wanted. I don't believe this is, like, I'm not stupid enough to sit here and go, yes, this is definitely what Russia 100% wanted, a long-lasting war to kill lots of people. No, that's very idiotic in my point of view. That's not something they ever wanted. I would say, however, go ahead.
Can we now? I feel like, are we discussing Nazism really here? I mean, all the things we're talking about now, right? We're not talking about Nazism because we're not talking about homophobia. That's not what the war has to really do with. Unless you listen to the Russians, then they're saying they're crusading against the gays. It doesn't really have anything to do with anti-Semitism, right? The Russians are not invading for that. You've said you agree with that. It doesn't really have to do. It has nothing to do with the political beliefs of the government, really, when it comes to their views towards homosexuals or that at all. The far-right parties, the actual Nazi parties in Ukraine, they don't have any seats. The only far-right party that I could really even closely associate with this maybe would be Svoboda, and they have 1 seat out of 450, right? So what we're really talking about, it feels like, when we're talking about Nazism, it feels just more like Russophobia. But that's not that surprising, because in the Russian world, a lot of people in their mind, Nazism is just Russophobia. A lot of the times the anti-Semitism, I mean, it's weird, but the anti-Semitism aspects, the homophobia aspects, the anti-Romani aspects, that gets kind of more put to the side, and it's more about the struggle of survival against Nazism, which was anti-Slav, anti-Russian, right? And that, so I feel like we're not really even talking about Nazism. We're talking about Russophobia at the most.
Yeah, I suppose we could argue that. Well, you are arguing that. I would say, for my most part, as I said, how I view what Ukrainian Nazism, as I said at the beginning, is from certain political military groups, but also certain people in the political
which Russia also has, by the way.
Yeah, which Russia also has. I think it has just come down to the case that obviously, obviously I am biased. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not biased. Is that obviously what I believe it's come down to is that, my preference is that, I found the information and I believe that, Russia's all right. And that you've obviously done your own research and you believe Ukraine is right. Ultimately, this is from what I can gather, is that obviously, we've agreed on a.
Oh,
Yeah, I kicked him. He fucking sucks. Get out of here. You fucking suck. Wasting my time. Boring as fuck.
Oh, shit.
You're an idiot. Get the fuck out of here. Fuck off. Move on to the call-in section. I'm not going to bore your fucking audience with any more of this retard. Get the fuck out of here.
Oh my god.
All right. Line
man.
up, callers.
Wow.
Line up. I can't do it. I can't. Sorry. I can't do it. Right? I was seconds away. You're done. Get the fuck out of here. Callers, you're in.
Yeah, Thomas. I don't know if you got the memo there, but
No, he's gone. He's gone. He's banned.
It wasn't an
done.
accident.
Fucking waste of time.
Oh, it
right?
disconnected.
Total fucking waste of time. All right. On to callers though, because I think we do have a bunch of people who likely want to call in. So while we're hanging out and while we're waiting, you might as well tell them some more of your awful liberal takes, because that'll probably make them want to call in just a little bit more, Dylan.
Wait,
So you've got the floor for a second.
Can I ask you a few questions, Andrew, before I got the floor? Can I ask you a few?
Fucking more interesting than anything.
Well, no,
that's
what I wanted to ask you about. Where did you get this guy? Where'd you find him? Because I'm not familiar with him. He wasn't like mean or anything. He was very polite. Where'd you get this guy?
He just showed up in the Discord.
Look, we've got a lot of people who reach out for debates. We vet them as best we can. Sometimes they work out. Sometimes they fucking suck. It all depends. You know what I mean? But I have such a limited threshold because I have such limited time that it's just like when something's, I'm just not going to let it continue while you bludgeon this fucking guy because he has no idea what he's talking about. And he lulls both of our audiences to sleep with his stupidity. So I'm not doing it.
Understand?
Not doing it. So someone else, some other fucking show can do that. That's not what you're going to get here on the Crucible. So go ahead. You've got the floor here for a couple of minutes while we get the calls lined up.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I'm really that much of a libtard anymore. I've been watching Yellowstone recently, which I think by default makes me a conservative man. So I don't know how many more libtard takes I have. I guess I'll just wrap up what we were talking about. For me, this conversation was very strange because I don't meet many Westerners, as I said at the start, who actually believe it, because it's meant for a Russian domestic audience. And if you listen to Russian state media and the media they publish for the international audience, it's very different. And domestically, they're going to be a lot more like these dirty motherfuckers. Like we're going to knock out their. While on the international audience, they're going to be a totally different messaging. And so that's why it was so strange to me to find a Westerner who'd actually, have access to more information and stand by this claim that that denazification was a serious justification by the Russians and not a propaganda point. So I'm not too surprised how it turned out. But I just want to wrap this up by saying I think this war has very, 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 very little, if nothing at all, to do with Nazism. I think this war has to do with a lot of things. You could maybe say resources. It has to do with nationalism. It has to do with NATO, Ukrainian sovereignty, Vladimir Putin's view of the world and his and the view of the world of his fellow cronies. It has to do with a million different things. But Nazism is something that gets the media's attention. Therefore, that's one reason people talk about it a lot. And it's something that the Russians can use as a propaganda point. That's why I talked a lot about. But it's not a serious contributor to why this war started. And there's not going to be any peace deal where they're like, you have to ban being anti-Semitic and being a Nazi in order for us to have a peace deal. Because they don't care. They never talk about that being part of the peace deal at all. It's always about annexing land because they don't care. They don't care. That's why they use Nazis in the military. That's it. That's all I have to say. Yeah, okay, I guess that was something.
So I got a question for you, Dylan, while
Sure.
we're waiting on callers. There's a couple people coming in.
Okay, I will say, I'll be honest, I'm somewhat intoxicated now. Like halfway through that debate, I was like, you know what, I don't, and I just got intoxicated. So do expect a more drooly kind of maybe slow
You had to bring
response time
yourself
today.
down to his level.
I would never be that cruel. But yeah, what's your question?
Just a quick question. We got callers in the back line, so I'll be quick. But
Sure.
You're a self-proclaimed globalist, you say, but then it appears you're very quick to come to the defense of the nation of Ukraine and the protection of the nation's borders. So how do you kind of square that circle?
I think you can have nations existing in a globalist world. Most globalists you talk to do not want to see the abolition of nation states, right? I view nation states as a way for citizens to organize themselves and as like an evolution from like the fiefdoms in the idea that kings control land to the idea that peoples and groups control politics. They are the political entity that should operate. And I have no problem with that personally, but I have a huge problem with like hardcore isolationism in trade. I have a huge problem when it comes to like religious bigotry, and a lot of times the things that would fall under the label of like ultra nationalism. But I don't have any problem with, say, for example, a language program in the United States to make sure that everybody understands English. I have no problem with that in Ukraine as well. I have no problem with nations trying to even protect their culture to certain degrees with like sponsoring programs and that. But I just don't want that to be at the detriment of other groups of people. That's my only concern.
Mm-hmm. I think what that comes down to is just a semantics battle where you define globalism a little bit differently than most people would, and nationalism differently than most people would.
I don't think I define it that differently. I think I define it more, maybe like more like in a historical context and more like dictionary definition of globalism, from my love of like international trade and like international organizations, which I promote, like global organizations like the UN. I'm in favor of the United Nations. I like those those are globalist organizations. That's why I consider myself a globalist. Hey, my friend
Uncle Bowden has arrived.
How's it going?
Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead with your question whenever you're ready, Uncle Bowden.
Yes, certainly. Sorry, I got in. I just caught the last 10, 15 minutes of the debate before the guy got kicked. I'm saying my rosary. I'm a traditional Catholic. And, oh, Lord, why me? Why the burden? Teaching these fucking kids basics. I just mind boggles. But again, as a good Catholic, I shall forgive them and I shall teach it to the best of my abilities and knowledge. Okay. The starting point, and by the way, I'm not throwing some sort of superiority, smart-assing around. I would recommend to all of you, including you, Dylan, you effing globalist, but anyway, that's another story for another day, is start with a book called The Idiot. It's Dostoevsky. Very good book. Now, I studied politics, political science, French, Russian, German, history and literature. Now, we can all bullshit around these phrases like, what's the phrase? Nazi, fascist. That's all. I mean, did anyone tell you fucking the war finished 70, 80 years ago, 1945? Fuck. We're still talking about these sort of buzzwords which mean nothing. Nothing. Zero. Nada. Nicht. That. I mean, we're talking about all these bullshit things with your media. That, oh, he's a Nazi, he's a fascist, he's a misogynist. What the fuck are you? Well, look at this lexicon you're using. It's absurd. I just can't get over it. I'm really. I don't know whether to laugh or fucking cry, honestly. But anyway, just a few things. If you want to know the true story, or we can bullshit around about Nazis. I don't know. Put it in a nutshell. There was a thing called the Cuban crisis. Have you ever heard of the 1963 Cuban crisis?
I mean the Cuban Missile Crisis? Okay. Thought it was a question.
What basically happened is, what's his name? Castro, the true father of Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, was a good mate with Khrushchev, the prime minister or the president of Russia or USSR.
He wanted to put a pin in that? Can I ask you about that? You said he's the true father of Justin Trudeau.
Yeah. Don't you know the rumor? Don't you know?
I had no idea.
His mother had an affair. Justin Trudeau's mother, the communist, had a fuck with the late Castro from Cuba.
That's
and
incredible.
He was born. He's illegitimate. Yeah, well, there's another story for another day.
Incredible.
Anyway, I know. It's a shock to a neoliberal system. Take it easy. It's all right.
It's very. I'm shaking.
I know. You got to, anyway, just to cut the long story short, and the objection that the world came to a nuclear war so close, yet so far, and the reason was the Russians wanted to put nuclear rockets in Cuba. Now, if they succeeded in that, from Cuba to your place of abode would probably take a couple of minutes, and then your parents could have kissed their asses goodbye. You wouldn't be here. All right? So that's one thing. Now let's transform or transfer that argument to the current situation between Ukraine and Russia. I see that as an unfortunate third European Christian war. First World War was not a First World War. It was a unnecessary European Christian war. Second World War was absolutely a brother killing a brother. And this is the third time, which is unfortunately happening. The reason being is when the war went down in 1989 and your president was Mr. Reagan and the other guy was Gorbachev, NATO had 12 countries, member countries. And the purpose of NATO was what? Fight the fucking communists. That's the only purpose it had. All right? The only purpose. And there was an undertaking given by your president, Mr. Gorbachev, take down that fucking wall. Remember that? Oh, God, why me, God?
All right, hang on. You gotta let him respond.
All right. So what I'm getting at, NATO countries have increased from 12 members to fucking 30 members at the moment. And Warsaw Pact countries, but there's no more communism. Remember? Russia no longer is, the empire of Russia. I'm calling USSR.
Jim, you gotta try to formulate this into a question.
All right. The question is, America is behind that. It's a proxy war. Remember, America said openly, we will fight to the last Ukrainian.
Not a question. That's another statement.
And the question to you is, wait, just hold on, hold your horses. Is if Ukraine wins, nuclear weapons go right into around Kiev, and from Kiev to Moscow, it's like from Cuba to Washington. That is the issue. So of course there's phobia about the country, and there's no natural. If you look at the topography of Ukraine, there's no mountain range. Russia always said the phobia about Europe. Are we European or not? Napoleon invaded, and what happened? He got his ass kicked. Hitler invaded. What happened to him? Same thing. That's the thing, and it's a breadbasket of the world, of Europe. That's the second. Now the question is, they are not allowed to. Do you agree? Do you agree with me that Ukraine will never win, or they can win provided they don't join NATO? That's my question. Would you agree? They rejected that. Zelensky, the piano playing president.
Awesome guy. Love that video.
Yeah, he plays piano with his circumcised penis.
Don't know why. Do you think the circumcision affects the tone of the music, or
how can you fucking follow it?
You okay? How can I? Okay, so is my question about NATO expansion? Is my question about Zelensky's penis and following him because of that?
Yeah, it's circumcised, mind you. It's much shorter, and he's still playing. He manages to play piano.
It just shows how large his cock is, I guess. I don't know.
Well, he's got big kahunas. That's all I can say.
So, I would say.
Now, the question is, can you see through your? Get your hair back, back, so you can hear the question.
We got to say it.
See, I mean, I don't know. Can you see the problem Russia is facing? I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not justifying that. I love Ukrainians. As a traditional Catholic, there's a lot of Catholics in there. There's 44 million Ukrainians. A lot of them are Orthodox, and about 3 million are Catholics of that population. I know my history a bit about it, and not that much anyway. But the point of this war is American military complex is making, and guess who's behind that? Pfizer, Amazon.
What? Well, we're talking about vaccines now. Come on.
You gotta let him respond.
The question is, the simple question is, Ukraine can come to a peace provided they never join thing. Do you agree with that or not?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to respond to that. I believe that we have very short-term memory when remembering Ukraine and nuclear weapons. It wasn't that long ago that American and Russian officials were trying to negotiate. By the way, I can hear somebody's echo.
Yeah, there's feedback. Can you mute yourselves in? Maybe it's from you.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, I have to start drinking. It's 2:30 here in Sydney. Just got to me.
All right, let him respond. Go ahead, Dylan.
I think we have a little bit of short-term memory when it comes to you.
Short-term dicks. That's what I reckon.
Let him respond, Jim. Let him respond.
Go ahead, Dylan. I got a suggestion. Can we? Because we got somebody in the back line who's on it.
Sorry about. I'll get off. I'll get off. Just come.
We'll bring you back.
Answer my question to that.
Okay. So
go on.
Let me just answer the question quick. So I think we have somewhat short-term memory when it comes to Ukraine nuclear weapons. It wasn't that long ago that the Soviet Union was collapsing and Ukraine had one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, the entire world. And Russia and America agreed with Ukraine that they would respect the territorial integrity, Crimea, Donbass, everything included, if they were to give up that nuclear arsenal. Now, a lot of Ukrainians here, oh, look, we gave the nukes away, then we got invaded. Maybe we shouldn't have given the nukes away. Now, at the time, they were talking about the financial costs and all this, and all those little tiny details aren't remembered in the Ukrainian mindset. They just remember, we had nukes, we gave them away, then we got invaded. Looks like nukes are the solution, because obviously we wouldn't get invaded. But I think the solution isn't necessarily even keeping Ukraine out of NATO, but keeping Ukraine denuclearized. There are nation states in NATO on Russia's border right now, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that are on the border in NATO, have a quite large border with them.
Let's not forget Finland.
Finland very soon, but are denuclearized. They don't have nuclear weapons there. There could be an agreement written up where Ukraine gets to join NATO to stop a future Russian invasion, but they don't have nuclear weapons there. Or defensive agreements between the United States, Great Britain, and some other powers with Ukraine that says they would come and directly support them in a future invasion. Ukrainian mindset when it comes to this war is this is the last war in the cycle of oppression and violence. We don't want to fight another. We finish this war here and now. We don't kick the can down the road. But if they don't have security guarantees from a collective structure of defense, then it's impossible for us to really guarantee that Ukraine won't be invaded again, because that collective defense guarantee stopped Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, these other countries, which Russia could easily justify an invasion for using the same justification used to invade Ukraine. They haven't done it there because of that, the collective defense. So I do agree about keeping nuclear weapons out of Ukraine. I don't necessarily agree with keeping them out of collective defense agreements.
They, at the moment, as you know, there's 18 more countries since '89 have joined NATO.
Oh yeah, I wanted to talk.
They let me finish. They do not at this stage have nuclear weapons. The only countries in Europe which have nuclear weapons are France and England. Okay, they're the only thus far in the NATO. But the cards were on the table in '89 between Gorbachev. It was agreed we dismantle Warsaw Pact, and you will not take over the countries that the countries you just mentioned. They were the buffer zone.
That's disputed. That's heavily disputed.
Zone of Russia.
I think you're talking about the West German negotiations. Gorbachev has said.
No, I'm not talking about West German. I'm talking about John Paul II. I'm talking about the meeting in Vatican they had.
The meeting in Vatican.
The collapse.
Okay, so if the reference I'm always brought to is that there was negotiations during the reunification of Germany.
No negotiation. There was a done deal.
You gotta let him finish. You gotta let him finish, Bowden. Go ahead.
That there was a negotiation about the reunification of Germany, and the agreement was made that there won't be any more NATO bases or NATO expansion into the rest of Eastern Europe. That is what I usually hear. It's that was 1989 or 1990 that negotiation happened. Now that's what I usually have heard. I don't know about the Vatican meeting specifically, but in the meeting that I am familiar with, Gorbachev has said multiple times since then that there was not an agreement came to about NATO not expanding past Germany. The agreement had to do with not expanding military bases into East Germany once it's reunified, because they didn't even think the Warsaw Pact was going to collapse yet. That wasn't even like on their mind at the time. Gorbachev says stuff about the spirit of the deal being possibly violated, but there was nothing in writing. And even all the other meetings and all the other hypotheticals, none of this was ever in writing. None of it. There's no physical copy of like, hey, we have agreed that we will not do that. And it's hard for me to imagine that Russian negotiators actually looked at this and said, you know what? A verbal agreement is enough when it comes to the expansion of NATO. Give us a verbal agreement. We don't need to write anything down. We don't need to keep a record of it. A verbal agreement will be enough. I find that kind of suspect. And ultimately, I would say that's in large part the fault of the Russians for not if that did happen, not wanting a written agreement.
Well, I won't keep you things. What I'm afraid, and you probably don't realize, or most of you, or us don't realize, is your president, the American, the so-called leader of the West or liberal democracy, has his hand on a nuclear button. I pray to God that he keeps his hands on Jill Biden's pussy more than on the nuclear button. That's all I got to say.
Okay.
Because he's so dangerous. He's so dangerous. I got to be sarcastic and funny, but it is very, very, very dangerous. We are
not
laughing,
that
we are
dangerous.
joking, but we are. Well, mate, I beg to differ.
I mean,
But
people.
that's
I think this is largely
But
the
that's
media
nothing. China
overplaying
is
it.
watching. Russia has shown its weakness, but the problem is they've got nuclear weapons. The danger is next to me, which is called Taiwan and China. And I think America has picked the wrong enemy. Real, if you want to talk about enemy, us and them, is China, not Russia.
Well, I
The
appreciate.
reason I like.
I'm sorry, I got to cut you off. We have
Sorry,
so many other callers. Thank you so much for that call in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
We are going to have Uncle Bowden on for a long-form debate. I don't want to announce the details yet, but just know, chat, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be huge. You'll know it when it comes, but we all love Uncle Bowden. He'll be back.
Can I just quickly say about the nuclear weapons question? There is, of course, a risk with any international confrontation that it could spiral out of control and a nuclear event could happen. But that's true of anything. It was true of the war in Afghanistan for the Soviets and the Americans. It was true about the war in Vietnam. It was true basically about Korea. It was true about that, especially Korea, because the nuclear arsenals of the world had yet to fully develop, and America had more of that kind of that potential of destruction. And MacArthur was actively saying, yes, let's do it. But I think this specific war, when it comes to the nuclear threat, it's been hyped up a lot by the media because it's very easy to get people to watch a news show if you say, the world's gonna explode, the world's gonna explode, the world's gonna explode. And there is a real risk here, but I think it's often overplayed. You don't need to be at the point where you're like, I need to pray to the Lord to make sure that Joe Biden, like, I think we can reel it in a bit.
You want to go ahead with okay?
Yeah, I was gonna say our next one here, JY. If you're still there, I know you're on a time crunch. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to quickly preface a few things and then just ask a quick question. Then I got to skedat. So Dylan is often making the claims that there is no Nazi presence in Ukraine that is of any significant influence over the Ukrainian government because they don't have seats in power. But by definition, if a state is corrupt, it doesn't matter what the people vote on because fundamentally the power is rooted in things outside of the state. So everyone knows that the Nazi battalions have undue influence on the military, and the military essentially is a military dictatorship at this point because of the war. That's one. And then two, we have to remember that Russia, he has not really addressed, besides hand wave, Russia's concerns. With Putin has made very clear what Russia's concerns about Ukraine were for like going on 20 years now. And so I don't see it as a really good argument to say, well, all of Russia's concerns can be hand waved because Ukraine has a sovereign right. Meanwhile, he doesn't hold these same standards for other places, like he didn't address the Cuban point and other things like that. So I think that really ultimately what we have to look at is which side is being more consistent. I don't think Dylan is being truthful. I think he's biased because he went to Ukraine, and emotionalism clouds his judgment on these matters. And so from a Russian perspective, it is clear that NATO has encroached on their ability to defend themselves. And propaganda from the West for decades has painted Russia as this big, mean, evil people, while at the same time hoisting them with all the responsibilities of the Soviet Union debt-wise, while giving them none of the respect the Soviet Union had.
You've got
when
to
they
get
were
to
the
question,
Soviets.
JY.
Yeah.
JY,
so Dylan, how can you justify defending Ukraine in all these manners when you don't give the same due respect to Russia that Russia has when they still have the same debts that the Soviets had. Yet they don't give him the comparable amount of respect.
So your question is, because Russia took on the debts of the Soviet Union, therefore I need to inherently respect what Russia's beliefs are about the conflict and give them moral weight and say this has value because the Russians believe it because they took on this debt. I don't agree with that at all. They can take on the debt and then afterwards still make horrendous, disgusting decisions that I don't endorse and I don't agree with. The reason I don't give the Russians much credence or much credit when it comes to the war, when it comes to their interests in the war, is because I that's why I support Ukraine, because I think their interests are much more moral. I think they're more in the right, and I think the Russians really don't have much ground to stand on when it comes to this invasion. It's part of the reason why nobody thought the invasion was going to happen in the first place. So I guess that's why I don't give it much weight, is because I just don't agree with their interests. You said, like, for example, you talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why wouldn't I respond to that? If JFK decided to invade Cuba based upon the idea that Cuba would join an alliance with the Soviet Union, that would be absolutely ridiculous. Because we're not even talking about the transferring of nuclear weapons into Ukraine. We're talking about the possible down the road integration of Ukraine into NATO, because currently it can't because of Crimea annexation. So I don't understand. And also I didn't respond to it because that guy rambled for I don't know how long. I only made out so much. When it comes to the idea of the Nazis having undue influence because Ukraine is corrupt, Ukraine is a corrupt country, but that doesn't mean that the Nazis are the best at corruption. Getting elected into power a lot of times actually requires you to be corrupt in how you work with advertisers and media control and buying votes and buying a bunch of different stuff that leads to you getting elected. The Nazis don't have that much political influence. The Nazis don't have even that much influence in the military. They do have influence, but it's not nearly enough to either call Ukraine a Nazi state or to justify an invasion of Ukraine based upon Nazism. The reason I don't give much credence to the Russian interests in this war is because I disagree with what their interests are. For example, the Sevastopol military base, I do not think a military base there and being strategically beneficial to them justifies their invasion. Neither does the annexation of the Donbass, Zaporozhye, Kherson, or any of these areas that statistically, if you poll the people from before the war, or the pre-war polls, don't want to be part of Russia. And I would say, since the war, want to be part of Russia even less.
All right, thanks for that. JY said that his phone crashed, but I think he had to go anyway. So
gotcha.
Thank you for the
Was there
call,
anything
JY.
I missed? He went on for a bit, so is there any question that he put forward that I missed?
I think you covered most everything that he said.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not dodging a question or anything or missing anything.
You're good. Big Haas, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hello.
Oh.
All right. My question is, like, this war, like, should just end right now. I mean, like, Ukraine, as corrupt as it is, I mean, with the power that Zelensky has taken and everything, how is it going to turn out in any way good? I mean, Russia has nukes. I mean, it's so hot. Even if everything were to just like, oh, just go back and don't do it again. I mean, Ukraine, as a consequence, would just be forced to like, oh, we can't ever have something like this ever happen again. We need to have the nukes, and we also need to join NATO, and we also need to supercharge our defenses, and then they can just blame something on Russia to invade them or whatever else like that, or whatever to destroy them and neutralize them. I mean, everything like is set up.
Oh,
Big Haas, you still there? Yeah. We'll give him a second. Big Haas, if you're talking, we cannot hear you. Testing, going once, going twice. All right, send us a message in the private chat. Oh, there you go. Okay. You there?
Yeah, my phone turned off because whatever. I mean, it's too hot. I mean, Ukraine's got to be absorbed, or like the world's going to collapse in nuclear war. Because this thing, America keeps exacerbating it. I want your take.
I do not think that this is a zero-sum game of either one, Ukraine gets annexed, or two, the world explodes. There have been many wars like this in the past, where there's two geopolitical powers who are head to head, and both sides are saying we will never compromise on turning down our South Vietnamese colleagues, or we will never abandon the good communist people of Afghanistan as the Soviet military with our nuclear arsenal. But as time goes on, what at one point was politically inconceivable and would never be accepted by the good moral people of the country, eventually, due to just the facts of the situation, has to be conceived. If you would have told Americans after 9/11 that we were going to flee Afghanistan, run, dip, after that, they would have said, never, absolutely, it would be inconceivable. We would use nukes in Afghanistan against these terrorists before we'd surrender. But after 20 years of being grounded down, of losing our boys, spending what, like over $2 trillion in military operations and aid to the government, eventually what was at one point politically inconceivable, just due to the facts of the situation, became what you had to conceive. It's not an option to you. I again would say that this idea of nuclear war breaking out because Russia's a nuclear power is a lot of times overplayed by the media. If Russia was, let's actually play out a situation where Russia uses a tactical nuclear weapon, which is the type of nuclear weapon they would use in scenarios, against Ukraine. So what's the positives for them? Well, these weapons aren't that strategically beneficial in the way that, like, oh, they're going to completely change the landscape of the war. They're mostly going to be used as weapons of terror. You would have to use probably like 50 to maybe 100 to really make, I would think, a significant like change on the battlefield. You would have to use a lot. They couldn't deliver them by air. They'd have to deliver them by artillery or by like a truck missile or something along those lines, because they don't have air superiority. So that's the benefit. They have a weapon of terror. That's the one thing they get. That doesn't mean they win. Doesn't mean anything else than that. What's the negatives? Well, for one, radiation doesn't just sit there. Radiation a lot of times moves around. The reason why we found out about Chernobyl was because Swedish scientists could pick it up through their radiological studies, and they found out, hey, we have radiation coming over here to Sweden. Why is that the case? And then the Soviets were forced to come forward about Chernobyl. Radiation could go over into Russia, go into Moscow, go into areas that Russia doesn't want. This could, because of spillover, go into Poland, Estonia, all these other countries. That is going to cause a lot of international backlash. Not only is it going to hurt Russians, but it could cause international backlash. But okay, what if they plan to strike better and they take care of the weather patterns and make sure that's going to be okay? Okay, what do you think the West is going to respond to this? They're going to respond to this not by backing down. Russia just broke what is like a doctrine, like a principle that all nations since World War II haven't broken. That is the use of nuclear weapons in war, because no other state wants to see those weapons used against them and doesn't want the spiral that could happen that could blow up the world. And so their use of a nuclear weapon would mean probably more military from the West to Ukraine, more military aid, because they want to punish the fact that they just broke this doctrine. Now Russia can't win, because if they do win, the message is sent that you can just use nuclear weapons in a tactical capacity and get away with it and win. And American military planners, Chinese military planners, Indian military planners, Pakistani military planners, all these governments are going to see that, and it's like, that is not the message we want sent. The Indians don't want the Pakistani government to think that they could use a nuclear weapon to liberate Kashmir, and I don't think that the Pakistani government would like the idea of the Indians feeling comfortable to use nuclear weapons at all. The Chinese want to keep
Ukraine and Russia historically have been like together for the longest time. I mean, I get that the Soviet Union kind of did the Holodomor and everything like that. They really isolate, in my opinion at least, I feel like they isolated Ukraine from the rest of Russia because of like a lot of these things. And after the Soviet Union fell, I mean, you know, we all saw it. I mean, all the nations, like, you know, they split up. But I mean,
are we really gonna say that, like, if Russia was to invade Estonia tomorrow, we're just gonna have to say, well, it used to be part of, you know, historical Russia. It just has to be how it is. Like,
that's the thing.
That's like, the argument now.
The people inside the Luhansk region, Donetsk, I mean, like they mostly spoke Russian as their first language, and most of those people, they were like being berated even before the war broke out to join Azov or join whatever defense force to force them to speak Ukrainian. They were being like whatever.
What do you mean they were forced? Wait. You just said something wrong. What do you mean they were forcing them to speak?
They were forcing them to like, I've had like I don't know. I don't know history. I mean, I'm not well versed on the issue. I'm just trying to like understand the thing myself. But I mean, like but like to my knowledge, I mean, like even like just videos I've seen before, before the war and like during the war, I see like the Azov battalions going to like these villages where they primarily speak Russian as like most of their first languages in Ukraine, because they're not just on the border, but even beyond the border. They're like in the region. They speak because they're close to the Russia. Just like how
can I tell you an interesting fact?
Ukraine, they more speak primarily Ukrainian, and it sounds more closer to Polish because Ukrainian distinctly just in separation to Russian. I mean, like their language is more similar to Polish in their language.
Let me tell you an interesting fact about Azov. Azov started as originally was like a football hooligan group out of Mariupol that became a militia once the Russians invaded Crimea and then conflict started out. Azov primarily speaks Russian. If you were seeing Azov soldiers in eastern Ukraine interacting with Russian speakers, they were probably all speaking Russian back and forth, weren't they?
Maybe, but they also were talking about like wanting them to be more primarily Ukrainian, which would entail them
because
wanting
they're
to speak more Ukrainian.
But they're saying that as Russian
even though
speakers,
they acknowledge that Russian is part of their culture and language.
Well,
like
this is like
also speak Russian just because they're part of Russia.
This would be like talking to the Irish and saying like, "Hey, as an Irish person, I would like to be able to speak Irish more," and you say it in English. This is not that crazy of a political idea in Ireland, right? The idea that like as an Irish person, our language has been historically targeted and suppressed, and now we all speak English because of this historical oppression and this, cultural imperialism, if I'm going to use a buzzword, and we kind of want to regarner our historical language, protect our culture, and then they promote Irish in school and Irish in learning, but most people don't speak Irish in the area. But that doesn't mean they don't want to. And I interacted with Ukrainians in Eastern Ukraine. I was in Kramatorsk, and I spoke to an old man who was drunk as fuck, absolutely plastered, right? He was just wandering through the street, plastered, kind of bothering us, to be completely honest, right? Real character. And like eventually I got bored. I was like, okay, I guess I'll ask him questions, since I guess that's what I'm here to do. And I ask him like all these questions he's drunkenly stumbling about. And I ask him one question. I ask like, what do you think about speaking Ukrainian and like the relationship between Ukrainian and Russian language? And he says, I speak Russian here, speak Ukrainian here, in like the least like intoxicated way he could possibly manage. Right? Still intoxicated.
Wait, he did karate not here? Karate
yeah, he did.
Thing?
He did. He did.
Come
he did
on,
it. He
Dylan.
did. He did. I promise. I have it on footage.
No,
I have it on footage.
Here.
I'll put $100 on it right now because I have it on footage. I recorded it. I'll put
Dylan,
$100
$100 on everything, though.
I do.
Put $100
yeah,
on everything.
I'll put $100 anytime I'm right. Exactly. When I know I'm right, I'll bet money. Hey, that guy never came to collect, did he?
Well, that's true.
That is true.
He didn't,
so
but...
what my point is that a lot of people, and including Azov, feel this idea of like our culture has been historically robbed from us, and they are Ukrainian nationalists for that reason. But I don't think that justifies a Russian invasion, because the majority of the people around there voted to be part of Ukraine in 1991, even in Crimea. So they had the vote on the matter, and all the pre-war polling I've seen, none of it indicates that the majority of people in those areas want to be part of Russia. So whether or not they speak Russian shouldn't really be, like, I think, factored in it at all. Like, would we really say that Ireland has to be part of the UK because they speak mostly English?
Big Hoss, I'm sorry. I gotta kind of cut the convo there. We have a bunch of other callers who are waiting. Thank you so much for your calling.
I can do like 15 more minutes, okay?
You were slated for 3 hours. Now
was I slated for 3 hours? I got a text. I'll stay for 3 hours if I slated.
We're not
going
to run you 3 hours, dude. We're going to do a couple more callers. Get to the super chats.
Okay, I appreciate it.
We're not going to mog you, Dylan.
I appreciate it. I just thought it would be longer. That's why.
Yeah. All right. Hang on. Peacecraft. You've been waiting in the background.
How's it going?
Why does that name remind me? I remember this name.
We've talked
before. Okay, gotcha.
So, hey, Dylan, I wrote this down because I have a concept. There's no wrong answer. I'm not going to grill you, but I'd just like to hear your answer on this question.
Yes. Okay.
Hey, Dylan, while I utterly condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I'm curious about your limiting or threshold principle. If you're familiar with Peter Zahan and his work, NATO advisors, or at least he does, do say that while they understood Russia's geopolitical goals, they pretty much acted to counteract them. I agree with you that nuclear alarmists are, well, being alarmist, and the most reasonable hypothetical of the use of one would be a world where Ukraine takes its territory back and then pushes onto sovereign Russian land towards Moscow, and that this is very unlikely. However, my question is on your limits of sovereignty. In an example where China wished to station military bases in Mexico or Canada, America would realistically not allow this to occur, with responses probably from the covert to the overt to the economic. Would you decry this response as well? Does your concept of hegemonic or superpower projection have a hard line at borders? Or if a nation must act in its and its people's best interest, should America in this hypothetical act to disallow this military forward position? If so, how do you square this circle with no wrong answer either way? And thank you for your time.
That's a very good question. Also, why is everyone like Peter Zahan now? I don't know why. He's in my
Thank
friend.
He was just on.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Dylan. You can answer his question.
I was asking about Peter Zahan. Oh, okay, whatever. So I think when it comes to
well, I mean, he's still there if you need to ask.
Yes,
okay.
He was just on Rogan. He was just on Rogan, and his book's pretty good.
Got you. Okay, should I read his book? I never ever read anything by him. Which book?
The beginning of the end of our times, the end of globalization.
Okay. So I do agree with you, Raph, that 100% from like national security standpoint for any nation state to see like military bases or anything being built around them or near them that could be used against them, that's going to give them concerns. And I think it makes sense for them to act against it. But I also think that in some circumstances, those military bases can be more justifiable than others. For example, there's no risk right now of the United States of invading Mexico and annexing Mexican territory because of some ancient like territorial claim to like Mexican clay. That's not going to happen. So if there was this hypothetical scenario where Russia was putting military bases in Mexico, I think that there could be a moral justification if there was a legitimate threat that the United States was actually gearing up to invade said Mexico or colonize it. And I have no reason to believe that Russia, even if NATO didn't expand any further, wouldn't under other circumstances similar to this also still be invading Ukraine. I still think that the Russian nationalist aspects of this war would be there whether this war was happening or not. I think that the territorial aspects, the aspects around resource procurement when it comes to their access to the base in Sevastopol, I think that's something that they still are going to be caring about no matter what. And so I do think that there is a way you could write up a justification for a foreign nation like Russia or China having a military base near the United States if it was serving like a general purpose outside of just, oh, we want to kind of dome the Americans. And so I do agree that nation states can work against it, but I still think it depends on the morale. Number one, the morality of said cause being fought over and exactly what the purpose of said bases would be. And for the Ukrainians, that's part of the reason why no matter what, I don't want nuclear weapons in Ukraine. I don't care what happens. I don't want nuclear weapons in Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Finland, outside of like the worst scenario where we're actually spiraling towards something really tragic. And the reason why is because my only reason for wanting NATO in Ukraine is to stop a future Russian invasion of Ukraine. Even if it would mean like designing a NATO agreement where we don't have NATO troops in Ukraine or nukes in Ukraine, but we have a security guarantee, something like that, which could take into account Russian interests, I would be fine with. As long as we respected Ukrainian general sovereignty, the general territorial integrity of the.
Peacecraft, thank you for the call in. Appreciate it very much. Have a good night. I'm gonna. Move on. I don't
know what it is with the Crucible, Andrew, but every single time I'm on the show, there's like one person who comes in here and rises the bar back. In my opinion, like it's stumbling, it's fumbling, and he grabs it and drags it back up. I'm like, okay, I'll stay here another debate one more time.
Well, thank you for gracing us with your magnanimous fucking presence, Dylan.
Everyone needs a liberal.
What would the Crucible ever fucking do without you?
Obviously.
How would we ever survive?
Exactly. Thank you. I mean, I appreciate the recognition.
Richie, you're up, man. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, what's up, Dylan?
Hey, Richie.
I have nice to see you again. I have two brief questions that are sort of related, but not really. Number one is, how old are you? To just give me an idea of context for wars and stuff that you've received.
I am 21. I'm a young amateur.
Oh, okay, right on. And how tall are you?
I am 5 foot.
5'10". Okay, all right. So one of the biggest things that you had mentioned, it seems to me that you're sort of bouncing back and forth between this justification of practicality and ethical. And I find it annoying. It seems like you're only doing it when it's convenient to your argument. So for instance, you said, I'll just go right to it. The biggest problem that I have is your justification for banning religion, banning the Orthodox Christian Church in Ukraine. I can't even remember exactly how you justified that. I think effectively you said, well, actually, it was Putin's fault. Do you mind reiterating that for me?
So I said that the Russian Orthodox Church has a lot of Russian state influence, and it a lot of times operates as an extension of the Russian state. One of the examples I used was that the Kirill, very influential figure of the Russian Orthodox Church, the patriarch, said on national television that if you go to Ukraine and you die fighting for Russia, you will go to heaven. That is something that will obviously create a lot of hostility in the nation that is targeted in that language.
So is it justified then to ban practicing Orthodox Christians that maybe have nothing to do with that?
Well, they didn't ban Orthodox Christianity. They banned that specific faction of Russian Christianity. So it's
but that's okay. But that would be okay with you, right? Like justifiable in a utilitarian sense.
I actually would probably still be against it because I'm very against banning of like religious institutions generally. And it hasn't been proven to me enough that the banning generally improved Ukrainian, I would say, like state security to any large degree. And I think that as it has been used in the last few months, or last month or two, it has been used to kind of be like, look at the hypocritical Ukrainians fighting for freedom. Ban. I understand why they do it, and that's why I bring it up, because a lot of people just see it as like we're banning them because they're Russian, and not because of the reasons I've just listed out.
Okay, no, that's a fair answer. I'm glad you're being honest about that, because I believe that's one check back over towards us. I believe that if anybody judges are keeping score, yeah, that's 1 point towards us. Thank you.
Welcome.
You gotta wrap it up there.
Okay, all right. Gotcha. I'll be super quick. The last one is I guess the most important one is the media banning. Are you? I don't even know if this came up.
I'm against it. I've actually talked about this with Spike Cohen yesterday. He was the VP nominee. Well, he was Joe Jorgensen running on the for the Libertarians. And I'm against it. It was actually something that I think I talked about it before we did the program. But my main problem with that is that the government has no, I think, role really in certifying a media organization when it comes to. Here's the best way to here's my main problem with it. I don't want to get too specific. My main problem is the lack of warrant system. The fact that they can just do those shutdowns without a warrant. I feel like a court at the very minimum, if you're going to be like decertifying these things, not like media, a court has to be involved. It feels like removing the checks and balances while using justification that we have to do this. I don't think that's true, because multiple European Union like civil rights, or not civil rights, but media rights groups have talked about how this is going to be pressure on media representation in Ukraine. It's not going to affect like freelancers like me. It's not really going to affect me at all. It's going to affect larger media organizations. So I'm not going to see the direct effect of it, but I'm not happy with I don't think you posted it. And I'm happy that the Kiev Post and other Ukrainian outlets have
just a very quick response. I am very surprised to admit that you are literally Hitler. It's unbelievable that you would admit that live on the Crucible. No, I will say, man, no, I really like both those answers, and I didn't expect them. It changed my opinion of you entirely after you told me you were 5'10".
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Have a good day, Richie. Appreciate it very much. Now, look, Dylan, I do want to dive in the super chats. I do have one more caller. Do you mind taking the last caller?
Sure, why not?
All right. Askareth, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Welcome.
Go ahead.
Great, awesome. Hello. Hi. All right. So my question really is that, well, it was going to be about the church, but you answered some questions about the church, and even though I could probably, dispute a few things, especially about that, I'll probably go on to a different topic. And this is something that's been ruminating around my head about the way that the Russian Federation was treated after the fall of the Soviet Union. whether or not you think that this is somewhat of a fair treatment or at all accurate. Because, after the fall of the Soviet Union as an entity disintegrated. The RSFSR was one entity that became the Russian Federation. Ukraine was one entity. Belarus was the other entity. The Baltic states, well, they're a unique situation. All the other ones, they're unique entities, right? And after the fall of the Soviet Union, I think what a lot happened is a lot of the surrounding countries, not just like the surrounding countries, but like even places in the West, often treated the Russian Federation like it's the Soviet Union, and like the Soviet Union, like the Russian Federation uniquely is guilty for the crimes of the Soviets, whereas the other countries are kind of
Can I say something about that quickly? If you listen to the caller, I think it was J.Y. Lewis, I think it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
J.Y. Lewis came in here, and this is something we'll hear constantly from the Russian government, is like, hey, we took on the debts. Therefore, we inherited the legacy. You need to give us respect that the Soviet Union got because we did this, we did that, as he argued. And so I understand that, like, of course, Russia today is not guilty of every single crime the Soviet Union did, but they also cannot, like, carry the banner of it if it's not going to also accept the responsibility for what the Soviet did. It's like picking and choosing the legacies you want to inherit.
Well, it's not just that. It's just that what I'm kind of getting at is that a lot of the crimes of the Soviet Union weren't just committed by like the government of the Russian Federation or the people of the Russian Federation. A lot of what like I'm kind of seeing is that people are putting like the crimes onto not just the Russian Federation, but like onto the Russian people, on the Russian people exclusively, whereas everybody was complicit and everybody had their part to play in like what the Soviet Union did and how the Soviet Union operated. And like I think a lot of like even in the 2000s where you had countries, now in like hindsight, you could say, oh, well, they're right. But there's also kind of this question of, would the Russian Federation have been this aggressive had they not been treated as like, oh, you're just going to invade us to restore the Soviet Union? And, that didn't, I think, so do you think that if the Russian Federation had been treated differently, would it have gone on this streak, or would this aggressive streak, or was this kind of inevitable? Was the, like stuff about the Baltic states of like, oh, this is just the Soviet Union again, so we have to, Russia invading, when I don't think the Russian Federation had indicated that it's ever going to invade the Baltic states ever. Just kind of that.
I think if you ask anybody in Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, like all the countries that are like close to it and have that more, I would say, historically abusive relationship with Russia, they're going to make the argument, which their governments tried to at the time as they ran over to NATO, that this is just as Russia is, that Russia inherently is an imperialist entity. By the way, I'm getting some like beard scruffing or like some like paper.
I'll mute.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
What you're gonna get from like Poles, Estonians, Latvian, Lithuanians, like Romanians, Moldovans, like a lot of these people in these areas that have been historically, maybe Romanians less, but from a lot of these areas that have historically been somewhat colonized or conquered by Russia, is that Russia as an entity is an empire. That it is inherently an empire, and even a lot of the people like Ivanov Iliev, I never know how to pronounce his name correctly. I'm terrible with pronouncing Russian names, especially Russian philosopher, will be like, it is an empire. It is inherently an empire. It must exist as an empire, and therefore a lot of like Eastern Europeans are just going to take that on face value and say they inherently are just going to go out and always conquer. Some people will point towards, for example, like Chechnya, or a lot of the land that is in Russia is not Muscovite land, right? The idea of the middle-class Muscovite, the area from Moscow, but it's like Asian land where people who do not at all look or have the same cultures or customs or language at all with the people in Moscow also exist within this empire, which grew to tremendous size through conquest. And so some people will say, due to that legacy, this is just how Russia functions. It is inherently due to its size, and it needs to keep all the people together, an authoritarian state, and it's going to inherently try to continue that expansion. I don't want to agree with it. Sadly, it's been more convincing to me as of late because I've been talking to so much Eastern Europeans about this, and a lot of Eastern European historians who know more about this than I do. But I want to believe that isn't the case. I want to work towards making a European structure that includes Russia within it. Whether that means Russia joining the EU in the future, I don't know. But currently, with the government in place, that's just not going to happen. That's not a reality. Putin has quite literally outly like rejected the idea of like EU membership. He wants EU cooperation, not EU membership. I don't know what more we could have done during the collapse of the Soviet Union, try to drag Russia into like an EU structure or into a NATO or a post-NATO alliance or security structure. It's kind of hard to play alternative history, and I'm not very good at it. So many factors, and I'm not very fun because I calculate all against each other. But I would like to think that there could have been more that we could have done. Possibly during the Yeltsin administration. I think the only time, I don't know exactly what we could have done to be better at it. I'm going to be honest. I don't have an answer to that question. But if it was going to happen, it had to happen in the Yeltsin period up and to and like before the Chechen invasions. I think once the Chechen invasions happened, like it was a crash. Like this was like inevitable path that they're taking at this point. I think that was the time period probably. Past Chechnya invasion. I would say maybe second Chechnya invasion. I don't see it because I think that once Putin was in power, once they had two Chechen wars, once this like Russian nationalism had grown higher and higher lengths, and we had this ideas about Soviet Union collapsing was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. I think at that point, like ideologically, the government just like on a collision course towards doing something like the invasion of Crimea if Ukraine decided they didn't want to. So I think the time period would have had to been in the late or mid 1990s to figure it out, but I don't know what. I honestly don't.
All right. So I mean, okay. Nice.
No,
nice
no follow up. No follow up.
Okay.
So I appreciate.
You can
the call
DM me
very
if you
much.
want.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do that. Thank you so much for the call in. Appreciate it. Dylan, we're just going to power through the super chats. It's
Okay.
not. There's not a ton. From Adult Small Bear for $9.11. He says, seriously, though, why do either of these two care about some shit-stained country in the middle of nowhere that has been one of the most corrupt countries in existence for years? Fuck them all.
I have a lot of friends who are in Ukraine. I care about their personal safety. I think they're good people. I like the idea of Ukrainian sovereignty. I think it's a good thing. I think the less war in the world, the better. And so the faster Ukraine wins and ends the cycle of violence that's out of Russia is better for the world, is better for global stability. I like liberal, democratic values that Ukraine espouses to be fighting for, even if it's flawed in execution of those values. Most democratic experiments, especially early on, are flawed. And I care about civilian casualties. I have a deep interest in foreign policy, and I got into foreign policy based off of watching the brutality of the Syrian war, and so I care about those stories. Yeah.
Risky Dave sends in a $5 super chat, says nothing, my favorite kind. Benny Redpilled tipped $3.33, says Russia is a matriarchal hellhole. People are deluded regarding Russia being traditional. Russia is #1 in male suicides and abortions.
I will say Russia does have an extremely high abortion rate, but not only does it have an extremely high abortion rate, it also has a very low church attendance. I think what was it like 6? I know it was less than 1 in 10 Russians visit a church go to church. I think it was like 0. I think it was 6 or 7% was the last number I saw. I think religion in a lot of ways in Russian society more acts as like a political institution, as I've already talked about with church, but also as kind of like an aesthetic. That isn't to say that there aren't religious Russians. They are, but I don't think that the religiosity that the Russian government often advertises is exactly as advertised.
Okay. Wicked Wally sends in a $5 super chat, and he says, I'm going to need some new Aussie material. Give me a minute. I'll go check Outback. Okay. Cooper Chauvin sends in $3.72, says, if Ukraine is a democracy in progress, as Dylan put it, is he for or against billions upon billions of dollars coming in from other countries?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Mr. Miner says, thank you, Andrew. I'm guessing he's just thanking me for kicking the other guy off.
One last detail. I would actually I want it to be so other countries give more of a percentage of this than us. Obviously, that would mean we'd have less leverage, but I think it would mean that Ukraine probably went faster. I want the recent proposed 15 Leopard tanks from Poland to go. I think Germany should give the approval. I hope Germany sends Leopard tanks, and I hope that the British, or the rumors about the British and the talk of the British sending over their own tanks is also very good. But the French, as many people have said, are not sending tanks. They are not tracked vehicles, therefore they do not count as tanks. But I wish they would send tanks in the near.
Okay, thank you for the $10, Mr. Miner. Wicked Wally sends in a $5 super chat. He says, okay, good. I won't need any more new Aussie jokes. Couldn't think of anything aboriginal anyways. Maybe next time. Terrible fucking dad joke. You deserve to be shamed for that.
Banned,
For the rest
Wally,
of your
you're
life,
banned.
banned, gone. 2.2 acres and a polar bear sends in a $5 super chat and says, why wasn't he my history teacher? I'm guessing Mr. or Unky Bowden.
Uncle Bowden.
School would have been based as fuck. Wicked Wally sends in another $5 super chat. It says, I'm convinced our Aussie Uncle Jim doesn't even litigate. He just slaps the judges and tells them what the verdict is. Prove me wrong. It's Benny Redpill sends in a $3.72 super chat. It says, why do people buy into the false dialectic? The West is bad, Russia good. Both are satanic. Unfortunately, Christ is king.
That is true. I saw a lot of satanic rituals on the front line with you. They'd open up a portal, but Beelzebub before battle. Some super. How they hold out for so long.
Gotcha. Willie Jenkins sends in a $5 super chat. Says, Dylan Burns, what are your preferred adverbs? Come on, man. We got to skip that shit. Benny Red Pill sends in another $10 Canadian, $7.44 in real money. The Russian-Ukraine conflict is a planned thing to reduce the Slavic population. Proof? Ongoing mobilization on both sides. Young civilians like my cousin are deployed as cannon fodder.
You could say this about literally any war anywhere that reduces the population. Like I could say like the conflict in Ethiopia is to drain the Africa of black people, Africans. I don't know. You're gonna need a little. I think you're gonna need a little bit more than the fact that two armies at war mobilized, which most armies at war do, if it's as Russia and.
All right, that's the end of the super chats, Dylan. We appreciate you coming on the Crucible tonight. It was a little bit shorter than we would have liked, but that's okay. No big deal there. Shit happens. You want to shout your channel out one more time before you go?
Sure. You can find me at Dylan Burns TV on YouTube. That's my main channel where I'm going to be uploading a piece very soon about Elon Musk and Starlink. I had a crew aid workers film their process with Starlink, kind of break down all the controversy that happened between Elon Musk and Ukraine, and try to decode what would be the best path forward when it comes to like Starlink contracts. It's very nerdy, but I enjoyed working on the piece quite a lot. On my second channel, you're going to get my more daily stream content like this, where this will be uploaded and reposted, most likely. DylanBurnsLIVE. You can follow me on Twitter for my hot takes at DylanBurns1776. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
we did also
problem.
get a gifted membership from 2.2 acres and a polar bear. I don't know who it went to. I missed that. But whoever you are, congratulations for doing absolutely nothing and still getting a reward. And thank you, Polar Bear, for gifting that membership.
All right, Dylan, take care of yourself, man. Have a great night.
Have a good one.
Coming on.
Bye-bye.
All right. So sometimes you got to make the best of a bad situation. And that guy fucking sucked, man. He sucked. Fucking
He's
bad.
not the first, and he will not be the last.
To kick his fucking ass off my wonderful show. I couldn't wait to do it, right? I saw all of Dylan's little bastards over there in his chat talking shit. Fuck you guys too. You know you love this program. You know you love this fucking program. From all of us here at the Crucible to all of you out there in Crucible land, have a wonderful night.
Okay, I just wanted to watch that. I just had to watch that. I had to. Okay.